Welcome back to Plant and Water. It's good to be back. It's good to be back. Things have been a little bit crazy lately as far as our communication. We've been trying to do everything online, and so I'm thankful we're able to get our Plant and Water back today. In fact, we're going to be talking about God's timing today. When it comes to God's timing, it's everything. And I was thinking about timing concerning gardening. Mm-hmm. It seems like everyone is trying to plant a garden, or at least that's what seems to be the talk that I keep seeing. And we're looking for DIY ways to grow our own food. In some ways, people are trying to do that, because when you go to the store, you expect to find food, and sometimes we're being rationed, or it depends on where you are. You can't really follow a list when you want something specific and it's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. You just say, okay, what's there, what's available, okay, I'll eat that. And you tell your kids, this is what we're eating. And they say, okay, all right, we'll deal with it. So going back to God's timing is so vital right now. Because, these are crazy and strange times for us. But recognizing that it's all a part of God's timing, there's a comfort there. Mm-hmm. And there's a way that we can just stop and just breathe in and breathe out and recognize that God is in control. All it's right. God's timing that we must hold to right now and always. And we're being reminded of that right now. But when it comes to the gardening concept, the reason I want to bring that up is it's time to plant in the northwestern hemisphere. Right. Here in Alabama, mm-hmm. That's where we are. This is the time right now to plant. And so there is a time to plant, and that is biblical, literally, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. In fact, I think it's the Mamas and the Papas song. Yeah. Time to be born, yeah. Time to die, mm-hmm. Time to plant. In fact, that's Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 2. Would you like to read that,
Sure.
JJ?
Yeah, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and time to pluck up what is planted.
All right, so it literally says a time to plant. And the fact that it is that time now, this is the season. Spring is upon us, and this is where you start your gardening, right? So it's God-given. It is a season. It is this time. And so we're looking for God's time in what's going on around us. Well, it's time to plant. Everything is done in its time. If we were to wait, for instance, for when it comes to gardening, this is Gardening 101. If I were to just miss this window for planting, mm-hmm. and I were to try to plant in the summer, in the heat of the summer.
Better have a good water bill coming.
Yeah, you have a good water bill. But, if you water a tender plant in the heat of the day, it's going to whiz. That water will actually become like a magnifying glass and magnify that heat, and it will literally turn your little green plant into black char. If you were to try to plant in, trust me, I've done it. I've tried. Because I didn't know about that window of time. And so, when it comes to God's timing, there are specific things that we do. Notice it says there's a time to pluck up what is planted. That's talking about the harvest. Mm-hmm. There are also certain plants that are planted at certain times. God has established those things so that when you're done with a season for your tomatoes, you can start with your onions. You can start with your potatoes, your root veg. To where you can constantly be growing something year-round so that you're being fed, so that you're being nourished. God has established that in His time so that we're taken care of. That means we can trust in God. God's timing is everything, because that's where we put our trust. In fact, so we're talking about working the ground. We're talking about being a worker mm-hmm. in God's time. And there's a lot of questions around work. In this day and age, we recognize that it's the toil that we are doing is in God's time. Ecclesiastes 3, 9 through 11, really the first part of that, if you'd like to read that.
What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart.
All right, so God has given us a job to do. You know, you think about the first man that was ever created, what was his job?
Yeah, to name all the animals.
To name all the animals, yeah. To keep the garden, to take care of the garden. And even after the fall, he was then given a responsibility to do the same thing, to do the work, but by the sweat of his brow. It was going to be harder for his work to prepare the soil, and to get to the time of planting, it's going to take a whole lot more work. So work is something that is, again, God-given. And so so what Solomon in his wisdom is showing, verse 10, I've seen the busyness that God has given, or the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He's made everything beautiful in its time. So again, everything has a time. That means everything has an expiration date. Everything has a beginning and it has an end as far as what we're experiencing on this earth. But why is it that we don't like that? Why is it that, we're unsettled by the expiration date, by that concept? Well, I believe it's the next phrase, because He's put eternity into man's heart. Mm-hmm. God's put eternity in our heart. So within our heart, there's no beginning and there is no end. Right. Within our heart. Within my heart, I am up in arms about the expiration date. If I go to pour that milk into my glass and it has exceeded its expiration date, it's not going to pour, it's going to fall. Out, yeah. It's going to chunk out. Yeah, and that's just hold your nose. I think that's what you do. No, get a spoon. No. Too far.
Straw.
Get straw. Yeah.
Milkshake.
Depends on how thick the straw is, because really that stuff's hard to.
That's rough.
Man, that's rough. Case in point, we don't like the concept of an expiration date. And you could sit there and say, "Well, I don't believe in the expiration date." Well, you're going to be eating that yogurt from the milk. Anyway, so God has established that. We see that in nature. Like we said, we see that in milk. You see that in everything. But because we have eternity in our heart, it shows that we don't want it to have the expiration date. We're not satisfied with the expiration date. We're only going to be satisfied with things that are eternal. Mm-hmm. Well, that goes to show who is eternal. God. So what's interesting is the expiration date, the beginning and the end to things, will constantly point us to eternity. Things that were the way they were 2 weeks ago have changed. Mm-hmm. We just got the report from Trump that he's wanting us to continue this protocol of 10 to a room or to a building, to distance and to self-quarantine. He wants this until April 30th. This is changing the way that we are used to, and it's been unsettling. It's been challenging. A lot of people can't handle it. So, what is that pointing us to? Well, we want to sit there and complain. We can even complain and say it's just not how it used to be, or we can say, okay, to everything there is a season, and it might go back to the way that it used to be. It might not. We don't know. And that's why we're limited, and that's why we're frustrated. That's why it's challenging, because we don't like change. We don't want things to stop being the way that they're supposed to be. Why? Because God's put eternity into our heart. But we stop there in that verse. What's the next part?
Yes, to continue verse 11, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end.
So our heart has eternity in it, but we can't find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So at the end of the day, it's God's timing that we will not get our mind around. This is happening right now. I've been seeing messages, from folks, and one message I heard today was, it's God's will. This is God's will, all in God's time. That's something that it said. I thought, wow, that right there is key. This is God's timing. What is it causing us to do? This is really becoming an awakening.
Sure.
An awakening to realize, you know what? It is what it is, and we deal with it. but we're going to long for how things used to be.
Mm-hmm.
How about we long for putting our trust in God's timing? Because there is this calming that comes from trusting in God, trusting in His timing. We might not know what God has done from the beginning to its end, but we know that He does. We have eternity within our heart, which means we long for it, but realize that it is God who knows it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know about what's happening, but God does. That means God is the only one we can trust. He's not our last resort, He's our first resort.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people have used God as a last resort. Say, well, I've tried everything. I guess let's see what God has to say. God is the one who is the first resort. And these situations, these times, cause us to look to Him, and not to ourselves, and not to anything else. In fact, look at verses 14 and 15.
It says, I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before Him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away.
So that which is already has been. That which is to be already has been.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's hard to get our mind around, but not for God. Because God, notice He says, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. God's work will endure forever. God's work has no beginning and it has no end. God is. That's why when Moses asked, who will I say has sent me, when he went to the children of Israel, God says, tell them I am has sent you. Because I am who I am. God is. It's not God was, it's not God will be, it's God is. And there's an eternity to God. And so the work that God does is also eternal. And so we've got to hold to God's work. Therefore, we hold to God's hand. We hold to God's unchanging hand. We hold to God's timing.
Yeah.
And that will help us navigate difficult times. That will help us navigate what's happening right now. God is the one that we trust. So we trust God's timing because it is everything.
Yeah. And, going back to that comment that the person sent to you on a messenger about His will, now's an opportunity for us just to sit back and realize how busy our lives were and to focus more on what God wants us to do. Focus on our prayer life, focus on our worship, even if it is through live stream and you're sitting in the comfort of your home. This is opportunity for us to go, hey, you know what? I was too busy. I was too busy. And to really focus on our spiritual and our worship to God.
Yeah.
It's just not us in the U.S. It's around the world. That's crazy about it.
What's hitting everybody.
It was like, all right, it's time for us to slow down here and see what's important. It's just.
Well, that's why this has been an awakening.
Yeah.
This has caused everyone to go, whoa, my life isn't as secure as I thought.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
And what is secure? And that causes an insecurity for a lot of people.
It does, and it has.
It has. But that's why we're saying, okay, I'm searching now. I have an eternal void. I have a hole within my heart that is only going to be satisfied with eternal things. If I'm trying to fill that void with things that have a beginning and have an end, then my satisfaction is going to have an end, guaranteed. I'm not going to be satisfied. That's why we're told, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they will be satisfied. That hunger will be met with satisfaction. That thirst will be quenched with satisfaction only by hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Righteousness being God's word, God's will, God's timing.
You fulfill that void with this.
Yeah. So like you said, we're able to spend time with God in prayer and in study. And that's where we can draw closer to Him. So let this be a time for not striving after things that will pass away, but let this be a time for striving after God's work that's eternal.
Right.
And this is the time. It's the time to plant. So may we take this seed of truth and let it plant within our heart, within our soul, and so that it will literally grow up within our heart, and it will be just that living tree that's planted by streams of water, and that we will continue to blossom while everything else is fading. And we'll continue to show the light to this world. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for the comment. I think this has been a good discussion, and we want to encourage you. We are not able to meet together via the mandate. As far as trying to keep this COVID-19 at bay, but we have had our online presence. We have continued our services. We've canceled our 8:15 service, but we're meeting at 10:30 online. In fact, we have some of our men are able to come together here at the building, and we do keep our distances, and we're able to have our services. So we would want to encourage you to tune in on Sundays at 10:30, and yeah.
With that mentioned, come by on Saturday. Those who are near us and need the communion supplies, you can come by on Saturday from 8 to 10. A few of our deacons will be here to hand that out, along with the church bulletin, so you keep you informed about the other news that's going on.
Yeah.
And you can pick up that. And as far as your online giving, you can do that online or mail it in or drop it off on Saturday. For those who are
part of the congregation.
And if you're not, come by and say hey to us to the drive-through car, pull up and view us online. It's a very neat thing. It's really neat that we already had it in place, but we're absolutely 100% reliable on it now.
And it's funny. We used to have our online presence for our shut-ins, and now we're all shut in. And so it has really changed our approach to this, and we want this to be temporary, of course.
Yeah.
And in fact, this has caused a longing for so many of us to want to be together. So let's use that right now as an encouragement.
Right.
If you feel that there is a void because of all of this, why? Look at how blessed we've been, and look at how blessed we're going to be, because this is causing us to want to draw near to God's people more than ever before. And I mean, that's an encouragement, if there ever was one, And so I think that's vital perspective. We need this reminder. And I'm thankful that you've been able to take part. That way we have this reminder. It's not really necessarily a teaching moment for all of us. It's just to be reminded. Because how quickly do we forget? And we can even say, I'm just not feeling right. Something's not right. That's why. That's what the Word of God does for us. It reminds us what is most important.
That's right.
All right. Reminds us of eternity. And also helps us question, am I ready for eternity? Am I ready for living with God where this, His work will never perish, meaning that's heaven. It will never go away, and it will never change. I want to be a part of a world. I want to be a part of a life that every day doesn't change. Every moment isn't another curveball headed my way. I long for that, and that's heaven. And so, again, thank you for joining us. Also, want to make sure Wednesday night we've been meeting together at our normal times at 6:30, and so we've been having that discussion. We're trying to play around with background and whether it's at our home or whether it's here at the building, and so we're still working on that. But the time has been consistent. So, want to encourage you to join in for our 6:30. Time and also for our Sunday service, and then Sunday at 5 o'clock we've also been having a devotional as well. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at richard@deerfootcoc.com, and we look forward to seeing you digitally for the time being.
Very good.
But again, everything has its season, and this is a season, and we're praying that it will have its end very soon. But until then, we're putting our trust in God's timing because it's everything. Thanks for joining us. Y'all have a blessed day.
Have a good day.